essays, we're going to learn about the appropriate use of text evidence. So, in order to help us do that, we're going to take a look back at an old state test prompt. So I'm going to read that prompt to you. We'll think about what it's asking us, and then we'll talk about the best way to get evidence. So this prompt asks students to write a multi-paragraph response in which you make and support a claim about whether or not the current system of putting date labels on food needs to be changed. Your response must be based on ideas and information that can be found in the passages. So students read 2 passages about date labels on food, and they were asked to then argue about whether or not this is a good system or if it needed to be changed. Now there's different types of essays, and you may be writing an analytical essay, you might be writing about fictional texts or nonfiction texts, or you may be asked to make an argument. It really doesn't matter what kind of essay you're writing, they all need to be supported with evidence from the text that you read. So this specific example had student sample writing that came with it. So we're going to look at one particular student whose response earned a 2 out of 4 on the section of evidence and elaboration. And we'll talk about maybe what they could have done to improve their score to be closer to a 100. So this is one paragraph from that student's essay. I think we can get what we need for just looking at one. So this says, the second reason putting dated labels on food needs to change is because they are misleading and confuse people. When you go shopping in a store, you usually look for the furthest date that is to come on the labels because you want to buy goods that can last the longest. Well, those dates do not actually mean that the food is going to be bad on that day. All it means is when the food will be the freshest. This should be changed because it usually says use by or sell by, but they do not actually need to be sold or used by those dates. So people are throwing away food that is still good, and they are wasting money. So when we look at this paragraph, I think that this student had some really great thoughts and ideas and reasons, but there isn't actually any text evidence in here to support it. And although we can see here that they had use by or sell by in quotes, and those did come from the text, they weren't actually quoted citations. So we need to take a look at breaking down this paragraph and figure out where that text evidence should go. So they had a great topic sentence. They told us specifically what their reason was. It needed to be changed because it was misleading and confusing. And then they gave us good additional information, provided their own thoughts that helped us understand their reasoning. And this is exactly where we would want some text evidence to support all of that great thinking. So we look back at the passages. Whenever you're missing text evidence, you need to go back to your stories or your articles and see what you can find to support. So here's a couple paragraphs from those essays that those students were reading. And these 2 paragraphs, I thought, lent to having some text evidence that would support the idea of labels being confusing. So if you want to take a look at those and see if you can find anything in there that would fit, you can pause if you need to. I'm going to move on to passage 2, and here are some additional pieces of evidence or paragraphs from their passages where we could pull evidence. So pause here and read over these and see if there's anything you can find there as well. All right, so I found some evidence that I thought really supported this student's arguments or thoughts from the second passage. And right after their good information, I'm going to add, according to the passage 2, expiration date confusion is a major driver of waste. The dates are not indicators of safety, but instead are the manufacturer's best guesses of peak quality. Now, when I was looking back at those paragraphs, I couldn't find a specific sentence that I thought really pulled everything I needed to. So I was going to use these ellipses here to connect ideas within the same passage to show that there's some information missing in between. Because if I go back to that passage, you'll see that that information does in fact come directly from the text, but it's not directly in order. So sometimes you may need to do something like that to connect ideas within the text. All right, at this point, I want you to pause and go back into your own passage and find your text evidence and highlight it in green into your own writing in your own essay. So pause here if you need to do that. All right, once you have highlighted your text evidence, we can move on. If you didn't have text evidence, you're going to need to find some. So the best way to do that is to go back to any graphic organizers you completed or work you did while reading the stories that your teachers may have provided to help you understand what you read, or to reread the articles or stories so that you can think about, what is this question asking me, and where do I find evidence that supports what I think the answer is. If you didn't have evidence that you could highlight in green, this is what you're going to need to do before you can move on. Once you have that text evidence, we're going to start thinking about our next stage. And in the next stage of writing, you look at how strong and relevant that evidence is. So think about evidence as you're selecting it, if you don't have any. Does this evidence answer the prompt or question being asked? And does it support your reasons in the paragraph?